Okay, so I'm Rhian, also from Wales, via a few other places. So we've got a bit of a Welsh theme going on here today. Thanks a lot to Ben for that great talk. I've now got all sorts of ideas about monetizing other people's content by putting paywalls on other people's sites. Just a joke. So I've been involved in the Bitcoin and crypto ecosystem for 5-6 years now. First of all, because I'm a software engineer in my day job, and I started trading crypto, decided to build a altcoin portfolio tracker back in the day, 2013, 2014. I also run the London Women in Bitcoin meetup group, and I do some educational work teaching blockchain engineer type stuff for an organization called b9lab.com. You'll find me on Twitter and Medium under the handle Rhian_is. And I wanted to talk today about this idea that is coming out in the press quite a lot about governments and corporations saying, we're going to build Bitcoin, but better. So we like the idea of Bitcoin, but we don't think it will do what we want it to do. So I wanted to talk about why not only are these imitations inferior, but also how they are potentially very dangerous, very bad things that you probably shouldn't go near. So in the context of this, there was a piece of news last week, which I was quite surprised everybody was very enthusiastic about. President Xi of China announced that China was going all in on blockchains for all types of different things. And would you know it, the Bitcoin price went up and people started talking about the China bounce. But this is a really bad thing because Bitcoin doesn't need governments or corporations to legitimize it. There's this idea somehow among some people in the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency community that we're waiting for other people to give what we do our approval in order for this to be worth something. And everybody gets very excited by the idea that this company or this government thinks blockchains are really interesting and want to do their own implementations of it. In fact, it doesn't matter at all because Bitcoin is the honey badger. It doesn't care what other people are doing. It doesn't need to be legitimized by other organizations because what Bitcoin does is actually unique. And these fake imitations, which are luring people in, we should be very wary about. So I'm going to break this down into 7 deadly sins of both corporate and government digital cash so that we know what to be wary of when we use them. So obviously the big one is Facebook. We've all heard about Facebook's Libra project, which admittedly is a lot more decentralized than people thought it would be. They have a roadmap towards decentralization, even though it starts off as fairly centralized. And in fact, because it's open source, we've got people building the Open Libra project. So it's essentially a fairly centralized stablecoin. And we know that Facebook are not the only big corporation to be working on their own tokens. We know that eBay have filed a patent for their own currency. We see various companies in China going all in on their own tokens. But we might look at this and think, oh, this is going to be a really cool, easy way to pay for things, for these services, because they're going to have integrated wallets. People in countries where the currency isn't so stable might think this is a really good idea because I'm going to put my money into tokens which are backed by a basket of currencies rather than my own national currency. But beware, because there are many bad things that can happen when you start using these currencies. And we all know that Bitcoin is censor-proof money. Nobody can tell you what you can and can't spend your Bitcoin on. And if you're sensible about your OPSEC, you know that although it's not anonymous, it's pseudonymous and it's not easily traced. However, anyone who's ever bought things on Amazon or eBay knows about the contextual advertising. Okay, so most of it's quite rubbish. If you've bought one toilet seat or one broom, you don't then need to buy 10 other toilet seats or brooms, which is generally what Amazon suggests to you. But everything you buy, obviously, the organisation that you buy it from makes a lot of money out of accurately targeting your selling preferences. Big tech makes their money from sharing data. And if you're not only using their platform, but their currency as well, they have even more data on you. And we've seen a lot of incidents recently where governments are pressurising companies to create backdoors in their software so that they can gain even more information about you. So I would think that with these corporate coins, privacy is obviously a massive concern. Now, the other thing is fungibility. Fungibility is rather a dull word, but what it essentially means in economic terms is that if you've got a currency, one unit of that currency is absolutely exchangeable for another currency. So you have cash, it's almost fungible. So if you hand somebody a pound coin, it's pretty much interchangeable for someone else's pound coins. Of course, although that's theoretically the case, it's sometimes, in practical terms, not the case. So if like a old-style criminal who prefers using cash is holding you to ransom for something, generally they will specify that they want either used notes or new notes or whatever, because new notes have the property of not being traceable. And also, just in practical terms, how many people have come back from Scotland with Scottish £10 notes or Scottish £20 notes, which are legal tender in the UK, but they find that in England a shopkeeper or a taxi driver won't accept them. Theoretically, pounds are supposed to be perfectly fungible, but we see in reality that even cash is not completely fungible. Bitcoin is more or less fungible. You do get some kind of concept of tainted coins if they've been used for some kind of criminal activity, but that's kind of really marginal. Bitcoin's about as close as it gets to a fungible currency. Right now, if you buy something on Amazon, eBay, whatever, you can create multiple accounts, although they don't like you doing this, and you can kind of get round it a bit, or you can browse in incognito mode, look at prices, and see what the price should be. But you have absolutely nowhere to hide once your profile is linked to your big tech coin wallet. Your money basically becomes non-fungible. We see it a little bit with Amazon, where if they want to tempt you to buy something, they will not exactly change the price like the accommodation sites do, but they will give you 10% off or something like that. They'll lure you in with discount codes, which is a way of differentially targeting different people by price. A lot of people don't sort of think about this, but you're not necessarily seeing the same price as everyone else when you access certain merchant websites, whether or not it's an explicit thing, like giving you a different price on booking.com, depending on how often you've searched for a particular destination and how close it is to the dates you're going, or whether it's Amazon, eBay, and getting a discount code, which you think, oh, great, I've got a discount code. But actually what that is, it's the merchants targeting you for a particular discount. If once you you start dealing with your big tech coin, then it opens the door for them to use completely programmable money. And although we might think of these new coins as being just a stable coin, it's unlikely that they're going to resist the temptation to make them programmable in some way so that they can target your behavior, get you to buy more, change prices. It's just not a transparent, fungible method of payment like Bitcoin is. Corporate coins, I guess a lot of us, even committed Bitcoiners, are going to end up using them just for their convenience. And at the end of the day, they're a choice. But something that's not a choice is the type of programmable money which will probably begin to be offered by governments at some point, or are already being issued by governments. So we already see Venezuela's had its experiment with the petro. The Marshall Islands have their own blockchain-based digital currency, and China have announced that they're launching this DCP, which people are joking is actually short for deception, next year. So by 2020, we're going to have a very large country with its own digital currency. This is extremely worrying for lots of reasons. And with that in mind, the last 5 of these deadly sins are all about the terrible things that might happen when governments encourage us to use their own digital currencies and, in fact, make it compulsory to use these currencies. Because right now, we have a choice of whether we pay with cash or with a digital representation of pounds, dollars, or euros, or obviously with Bitcoin. Sweden is probably going to be cash-free within the next 2 to 3 years. It's estimated that Sweden will be the first country in the world to go cash-free. So once you lose the ability to pay with cash or pay with Bitcoin, you lose all privacy. But more than this, it allows governments to indulge in their modern monetary theory shenanigans with even more ease. Because right now, although they can easily influence the money supply, it's going to be much, much easier for them to do this once they have complete power over a cash-free economy. So we know one of the things we love about Bitcoin is that it's hard money. There'll only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. And just logically, that makes you feel like you can assess its value. You can have an opinion about its value. A survey this week showed that 29% of Americans still think that the dollar is backed by gold reserves. No national currencies are backed with gold reserves anymore. That hasn't been the case for decades and decades and decades. But most people don't think of this money supply as being infinite. Victoria talked about it really well before with her visualization of the amount of debt there is. So everybody gets, or various people get very excited about the idea of, oh yes, government currencies are going to move onto a blockchain. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be transparent. It's going to be decentralized. It's really not. If you read the white paper that was put together by some academics at London University about 5 years ago, suggesting how the Bank of England might launch a digital currency, that was going to be 5 nodes within the Bank of England, 5 minting nodes with 1 validator node. It's completely under the control of the bank. So they are able to increase the money supply just as easily, if not more easily, as they can now. It's just giving them more tools to inflate the money supply. Also, biometric ID. How many people use the fingerprint function on their phone? Okay, I guess it's because it's Bitcoiners. If you walk into a random audience of people, you probably get a lot more people saying this. But tying biometric ID to payments it's the antithesis of self-sovereign identity. We saw the BitMEX, I won't call it a hack, it wasn't a hack for people who don't know what happened. Someone at BitMEX sent out a mass email copying in all BitMEX customers' emails into the CC field instead of the BCC field. It was just the most ridiculous thing. So now everyone from the IRS to hackers, other bad actors, has access to all these emails. Email addresses are one thing. A lot of people don't have good OPSEC hygiene and just have one email that's associated with their identity. That's a choice thing. We still have some choice at the moment. But if we don't support this idea of self-sovereign identity where companies don't have our data and we rely on companies to keep that data safe, but we have our data and choose which bits of it to expose. The antithesis of this is biometric ID. So you can only imagine that when you have your government wallet enabling you to spend your government money, it's going to be pretty much tied to your biometric ID. So this, you run into all kinds of problems with this because, say, the government doesn't want you to buy particular things. It might seem far-fetched to us in Britain, which we think of as being a liberal democracy, that one day the government might have your wallet and you, with yourself biometrically identified, not allow you to buy a flight out of the country because they don't like your politics and they want to know where you are. But you look at China and you look at what's happening in Hong Kong, and you can see that governments inherently want to have this ability. And once we tie our physical selves to our ability to spend money, it means that we're complete prisoners. And this does sound far-fetched, but if you're living in China or Hong Kong at the moment, it's not that far-fetched. So the idea that you would be able to take money out of the bank and go and buy something without the government knowing about it would be, in future, that might be a really far-fetched thing. We're voluntarily, because it's very convenient, using face recognition, fingerprint recognition. We're happy to go down the biometric route. But in doing this, we're sleepwalking into a situation where this is going to happen with government currencies, although it's all very voluntary now. So that also feeds into this thing of nation states imposing their own borders and capital controls. Governments love the idea of capital controls because it lets them do particular things with their money supply, and also it means that if they've inflated their currency away to nothing, they can stop. People like in Venezuela. Argentina has actually just brought in capital controls. It's what happens when an economy's in trouble. At the moment, we have Bitcoin, and it was really interesting seeing the massive pushback against Libra, because national governments realised that it takes away their ability to keep their money within their own borders. And they were extremely threatened by this. It was absolutely fascinating because when the first announcement came out about Libra, everyone thought that, they must have done this in consultation with governments, but instead it was the move fast and break things principle where they were going to ask permission later, and I think even Facebook were taken by surprise with this massive pushback. So it's a way of making money for people as well, just the ability to trade in different currencies. So there are obviously lots of vested interests in keeping the system as it is, with fiat currencies that are tightly controlled, and the idea of something that's borderless and independent like Bitcoin. And to a certain extent, Libra would be borderless even though it's not decentralized. Absolutely scares the hell out of governments. So the programmable aspect of it is something that I think people aren't thinking about enough. So if you're familiar with what's happened in Japan over the last few decades, they have a massive problem. Their economy has deflated and deflated and deflated. In some areas of the country, they give away houses because houses have become so worthless. The prices of everything is declining. You have an aging population that doesn't spend money, and they've been trying to deal with this in various ways for decades. So every time in Japan, they have cut taxes. People just save the money because there's a savings culture there, partly because of Japanese national culture and also because people there are older and more inclined to save. So every time they cut taxes, people just stash their money under the mattress. And Japan's pretty much a cash economy still, so under the mattress is not a metaphor in this instance. People actually keep hard currency. So they've tried different things, including vouchers that expire after a certain amount of time, but it's a blunt instrument. If you have programmable digital money issued by the government, it means that you could, for example, say that the sector of the economy that makes, I don't know, DFS sofas or flat screen TVs that needs propping up. You could make it so that people didn't have extra money. They had the ability to go and buy consumer goods and reflate the economy, thus taking away people's choices. And worse than that, if you're in receipt of government benefits, programmable money so that people can only go and buy a particular type of food or spend money on a particular kind of thing. And obviously that appeals to the authoritarian tendencies within society to say people who are on benefits shouldn't have this, shouldn't have that. But once you go down the route of dictating what people spend their own money on, then I think we're a society that's in trouble. And government digital currencies enable all of this. So tie all this together with other trends, and you end up with something that could potentially be quite dystopian. The pilot social credit system in China is really worrying because they have, for people who don't know about the social credit system, they've essentially gamified human behavior in that you get merit points and demerit points on social media for behaving in a particular way. So if you jaywalk too many times and the cameras in the street recognize that you've jaywalked too many times, it can affect your ability to get a mortgage. If you express unsavory political views, your relatives and friends can receive demerit points. It's pretty draconian. And once you combine that with programmable money, it just becomes a nightmare because behavioural economy, even without going down the route of punishment or stopping people from leaving the country, behavioural, I'm an economist originally by training, but they're terrible people. And behavioural economists are worse than anyone because they believe that they can change people's behaviour by nudging them in certain directions. So this idea of having programmable money combined with social credit scores, it might sound like some horrible sci-fi dystopia at the moment. It might all seem really far-fetched and hysterical, but even if it doesn't happen, we should think for a minute before we give people the tools to allow them to do this, because once governments have the tools to enable them to implement these kinds of things, it means that they have to not want to use them. And in the words of the meme, Bitcoin fixes all of this. So it's really great to see so many people here who really care about and are interested in this stuff. And as Tatiana said, keep the faith. Questions and thoughts? Anyone?
Yeah, sorry. Just to quickly probably to this, corroborate what you said. There's the IMF input recently in terms of negative interest rates, and in order for them to implement them, they are going to have to eradicate cash. And the way they've thought of that is the digital token, or applying a second price bracket for cash where it will reflect the negative interest rate. So kind of going exactly what you're saying, that's coming from one of the lead financial institutions globally. But the other point I was going to say is, how do we get this message out beyond this kind of echo chamber that we exist in? Because as you say, most people are probably on exactly the same wavelength, and I think you brought up some really, really interesting points. But I always found when we try to talk about this to other people, they either go switch off and go, this is just doomsday, I don't want to know. They just seem to be comfortable, as you say, voluntarily giving up this information. You know, is there anything you can think of that we can kind of get the message out more effectively? Because we've got podcasts, newsletters, video feeds, and they still don't seem to be hitting the masses.
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because it is like the boiled frog thing. Until it actually starts affecting somebody, they just are very comfortable and they'll always trade convenience. I don't know what the answer is. It's very gratifying when you talk to people and suddenly the penny drops, but often it doesn't. And a lot of what you hear is, well, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to worry about. So generally then I try to do the explanation of why privacy is not the same as secrecy, and some things being some things people prefer to keep private, but it doesn't mean that they should be banned from doing them. But I admit it's a real uphill struggle, and I think the only consolation is that because Bitcoin is properly decentralized, it's very, very, very difficult. Even countries that have tried to make it illegal haven't succeeded. So, yeah, you can't help everyone if they won't see.
Any other questions?
Hi. When do you think governments will try to ban Bitcoin? I know India has already.
I was going to say they already are, aren't they?
China.
And I think Bangladesh has. I'm not sure. Is it Bangladesh? Yeah, it is Bangladesh. I just don't know when. I think there's been a significant. I've noticed with the Libra conversations with the committees in the US. There's been, it's as if a lot of political representatives there have only just heard of Bitcoin and realized what it means. And while there are obviously people in the States who are now saying, look, we have to fight back, America's just going to become left behind and become a backwater if we don't encourage this innovation. There are lots of people who are now panicking about Bitcoin, whereas before they hadn't really heard about it. It will be, and also Trump has come out against Bitcoin. I don't know. I'd be surprised if America banned Bitcoin, but I think, I just don't know. Let's see what happens. Politicians are weird.
Did you hear about this, that I think the Financial Authority of the United States, one of the organizations, the government organizations, was saying that we're going to accept Bitcoin, but each Bitcoin address will have to be tied to a name, and then the addresses that are not tied to a name will just become dirty Bitcoins, so they will not be able to be used. Have you heard about this?
I've heard, I did hear something about that, and that goes back to that whole thing of fungibility. But the whole point is that national governments can impose whatever they want. They can decree that certain Bitcoin have become tainted, but then the rest of the world is not going to act in concert with that. So somebody else is completely happy to use those Bitcoin. I mean, if I was told that there were Bitcoin that had belonged to an address that someone didn't register, and somebody said, do you want to have these Bitcoin? what would you do? What would you do? Well, probably actually, if somebody had not registered an address, I'd probably want to return them to their rightful owner and say, well done for not giving into this. But the whole point is, because Bitcoin is decentralized and there's no CEO of Bitcoin to pull in front of Congress, it's difficult, if not impossible, to impose those kind of controls. They can say what they want to do as much as they like. How they implement it is going to be completely different.
I didn't catch the beginning, so I do apologise. So I'm not aware of your awareness of global things. You said a little bit about what's going on in America. The thing that concerns me is global coordination on Bitcoin. If one state decides to go rogue or fully Soviet and, start clamping down, at least Bitcoin is a well place to flee with their wealth. Do you see asymmetries in different nations? So that, in other words, where's the best place to flee for our citadels when the British government goes nuts?
Malta. But joking aside, there is a lot of, states will always act in their own interests. There'll always be states, for example, like Switzerland. I mean, you have some governments moving in one direction, some governments moving in another direction. I mean, in Switzerland, you have trams going around with Bitcoin advertising. You can buy Bitcoin from national rail ticket machines. You can pay your taxes in Bitcoin. You have countries like Switzerland that are positively encouraging it. And also, as more institutional money is going into Bitcoin, regardless of whether we think this is a good idea or not, governments know that various companies that are domiciled within their borders, not just individuals, are going to stand to financially lose if they do this, that, and the other. So I think most governments will probably take a more pragmatic line. I think they will do this thing that we're now seeing the IRS doing, of requesting that people register, which is for tax purposes, which is why the BitMEX thing was just such a disaster. But I think in terms of banning, I don't think it's that likely. But I don't know, I'm not an expert.
All right, one more time for Rhian.
Thank you.
All right, and next up, we've got Igor Korsakov, who's going to give you an